Guys, it's dark in here. I don't know what. It's like,
Megan had a song.
well, I said it would. I completely forgot.
You don't have to.
Well, I should. We're gonna see how the next couple minutes go. She makes some good decisions.
It's just at 5:30.
I don't know who's gonna be separate tonight. Nobody.
Who's going to be at supper tonight?
Some girls.
Because, are you going away tonight?
Well, there's the guys dorm party tonight, and then there's a small group of us having a party for Claire. So I don't know who's gonna be left.
The left outs,
I
those that haven't been invited to the party.
Did you sign this?
Kind of same.
Okay, do you think that what I sent you will work?
Yes, I'm not sure how to,
You can sign it and scan it and email it to him. You can send it, you can sign it and put it in an envelope with a stamp and mail
He will
it to him.
lose it, I know that. He'll forget and then I'll be in trouble.
You can get all the work done
Okay,
and have him sign it in person and mail it, put it in your notebook once you get there. As long as I have confirmation from him what's going on, we can sign it when you
Okay.
get out.
but so the form has to have like your signature, like a bunch of people's signatures on it.
Right. Get a document from him that shows that he's real and
Okay,
an actual person and that he knows you're coming and what you're doing.
okay,
And we can plan. And then when you get there, have him sign it and stick it in your notebook.
okay,
I'll sign it before you leave and everyone else will sign it. And we have confirmation. Maybe I'll even give him a call and talk to him on the phone, to
Okay,
make sure that I'm confident that this is actually happening.
okay,
And then you can get the signed signature when you're done.
okay, cause it's, the first assignment on there is like, give him a bunch of paperwork too, can I just give that to him when I get there?
Yeah, I mean, you've made enough progress that he knows the basic parameters of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay,
you're.
Cause I didn't know how to like finish the assignment, cause I was like, I don't know how to give him this stuff, cause he's so far away.
You've sort of accomplished that anyway.
Okay,
The goal is to make sure that by the end of this, we'll have an internship that works. So if you do that, you'll be good.
okay. And are you my field director, or is Mr. Brookins, or not director, but like, who's my one here? Cause I'm really confused.
Okay. I'll take care of it,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
yes.
So I think your hair's pretty like that. Maybe so.
Former vice president, and Humphrey, the current one. Nixon had a big lead early on, but in October,
I wonder what would happen if I just went and sat in Becky's class. He would just welcome you. And then be like, goodbye.
I don't know where Taylor is.
I just saw him.
We were so used to his coming in here that we almost
And then
think
he
that
stopped.
he belongs in here.
Yeah. Well, he should have taken US history. This year.
Yes. Okay, so today, we are going to pick up here in dealing with the nation beset politics of the 60s and 70s. And just, if there was any questions. Okay, so it's next Wednesday, the 1st of May, May 1st. We'll be having our last oral report. So we want to keep that in mind. Invite all of anyone who might be interested. We have standing room only for that. All right, so that will we'll take care of that. And then let me pull up my screen. Okay, so 1970s, so we'll have prayer. And then look at the beginnings of the 70s, actually 1968, but the coming of Nixon, and that will radically change the way the country looks at things. So let's take a look. Let's be in prayer. Father, we do pray for your special hand here today. We thank you for your grace, for your help, for your presence. And we pray as we finish out these last few weeks that you will just work in each of our lives to accomplish your will. Help each of us to study, learn, and as we get closer and closer to the present day, we will see things as they are happening, even become part of our lesson. And so we pray for your blessing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, 1970s. So, here we're beginning with the election of 1968. We're gonna watch a little video about this. This election was really the transforming event that destroyed forever the solid Democratic South. Now, Texas was still a Democratic state. Carter in 1976 was the last Democrat to win in Texas. So Texas was still a definite Democratic state at that time. But as you can see, there were no other Democratic victories in the South. And that's because of this man, George Wallace, who was running for president on the Independent American ticket. He's from Alabama. And this was a segregationist, populist ticket. And what Nixon did not want was for him to run in 1972, Wallace to run as an independent. That if he ran for president, he was to run as a Democrat, because he was definitely worried that there could be enough votes taken from him in the South that otherwise would have been Republican votes that would throw this election into the House of Representatives or cost him the election altogether. As you can see, Hubert Humphrey, who was from Minnesota, he does win his own state, and some in the Northeast, but almost the rest of the country was Nixon. Richard Nixon is the president, is the Republican nominee. Spiro T. Agnew, who was the governor of Maryland, is the Republican vice presidential running mate. Interesting, Curtis E. LeMay, who is Hubert Humphrey's vice presidential candidate, is a rather interesting thing. He picked him because he thought that getting a military man on his ticket will bring all of the veterans out to vote for Wallace. But it didn't work out that way. Let's take a look at this election.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History.
He has one of these for every election.
The 46th presidential election in American history took place on November 5th, 1968. Sure, President Lyndon Johnson kicked butt in the 1964 election, but what a difference 4 years makes. In case you didn't know, the 1960s were probably the most exciting decade of the 20th century. Society was dramatically changing. And one of the quickest ways to realize this is by comparing music from the beginning of the decade to music from the end of the decade. Not only was there the rise of the hippie counterculture, but there was the rise of the New Left movement and Black Power. 1968 was a crazy year in American history. There were many riots and just a lot of mad people who took to the streets to protest. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated for crying out loud. Meanwhile, Johnson's popularity declined dramatically, mostly due to the Vietnam War. Each year during his presidency, Johnson had sent more and more soldiers to fight in a war that more and more Americans were saying was stupid and pointless. Not only that, the war was not going well at all. It was looking like this might be the first war that the United States lost, ever. Well, unless you count the Civil War. Despite all this, Johnson decided to run for re-election.
You sort of got to
But
a
he
draw
did
in
have
the war
opponents
meets in
like
by the way.
Eugene McCarthy, the senator from Minnesota, and Robert Kennedy, the brother of John Kennedy, and now senator from New York. With the Vietnam War getting worse and worse, and Johnson not doing so well in the New Hampshire primary, he decided to drop out of the race. After this, Vice President Hubert Humphrey decided to run. In the Democratic primaries, it was basically a three-way race between Humphrey, Kennedy, and McCarthy. Humphrey had supported sending troops to Vietnam, and Kennedy and McCarthy were both strongly anti-war. This would make you think Kennedy and McCarthy were all cozy, and they used to be, but McCarthy was a little annoyed that he was the first one bold enough to challenge Johnson about the war, and now Kennedy was winning all the glory from it. Kennedy and McCarthy debated each other several times, and the two were in a tight race with the most delegates heading into the convention. But then, more tragedy. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles on June 5th by a dude named Sirhan Sirhan, who to this day says he does not remember doing it. Yeah. The Democrats tried to press on after Kennedy's death. Many Kennedy supporters switched to support McCarthy. However, at the convention, despite violent confrontations between anti-war protesters and the police going on right outside, Hubert Humphrey won the nomination. The Democrats went with Edmund Muskie, a senator from Maine, as Humphrey's running mate. The Republicans once again had Richard Nixon, who had returned for another go at it after losing the 1960 election. Nixon was always the frontrunner for the nomination, but George Romney, the governor of Michigan, posed a big threat early on. Later, Ronald
Mitt
Reagan,
Romney's dad.
governor of California, an even bigger threat. At the convention, a bunch of candidates tried for the nomination, and Republicans also wrote in a ton of names, like people from other political parties. This proves there was significant opposition to Nixon, but he won the nomination anyway, barely, and with the help of former Dixiecrat Strom Thurmond, who is now a dedicated Republican thanks to liking Barry Goldwater. The Republicans nominated Spiro Agnew, the governor of Maryland, as Nixon's running mate. Well, we haven't heard from third parties in a while, so it's about time someone like this dude came along to challenge the status quo. The newly formed American Independent Party nominated George Wallace, the now former governor of Alabama, for president of these here United States. Curtis LeMay, the former chief of staff of the Air Force, was his running mate. Wallace continued to run on a segregationist platform. However, he was also a populist, appealing to many blue-collar workers outside of the South. Wallace polled as high as 21% in September, but most Americans thought he was just a bit too racist for them. Therefore, as election day drew near, it seemed it would be either Nixon or Humphrey. Nixon, a former vice president, and Humphrey, the current one. Nixon had a big lead early on, but in October, Humphrey began to make a comeback in the polls, mostly due to Wallace supporters coming his way. Nixon campaigned on bringing back, quote, law and order, and promising to end the draft, and had a, quote, secret plan to end the Vietnam War. Humphrey campaigned on continuing and even expanding Johnson's popular Great Society welfare programs. He got a big boost when Johnson announced that the United States would be rolling back its efforts in the war just a few days before the election. On election night, no one seemed to have a clue who would win. And here are the results. In another sweeper, this time Richard Nixon came out the winner. He became the 37th president in American history. The Electoral College was deceiving. Nixon received 301 electoral votes, and Hubert Humphrey received 191. However, with the popular vote, Nixon got 43.4% and Humphrey got 42.7%. This weird difference between the electoral vote and the popular vote inspired the closest we have ever got to getting rid of the electoral Electoral College, which was the proposed buy-seller constitutional amendment, which obviously did not pass. George Wallace came in third, with 46 electoral votes, all in the South, of course. He got 13.5% of the popular vote. Wallace was the last third-party presidential candidate to win all of the state's electoral votes. Spiro Agnew became the 39th vice president in American history, and also the one with the best name.
Spiro Agnew!
Humphrey should have felt lucky. After 1968, the only way to win the presidential nomination was through the primary process. Humphrey was the last nominee of either major party to win, despite not really competing in the primaries. With this election, the former New Deal coalition, or different groups of people who had all traditionally supported the New Deal programs of FDR, officially fell apart. For the rest of the century, the Democrats struggled to get a president elected, unless they were from the South. I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
So, this was a pivotal election. It broke up the South. Those disaffected Democrats who voted for Wallace will become Republicans in the next go-around. Now, Richard Nixon. He was the first president that would be elected in my lifetime, although there were several presidents that did live into my lifetime, just barely. And I think Lyndon Johnson just missed me by about a month. He died before I was born. Couldn't wait around on that, unfortunately. Now, Richard Nixon was born to Quaker parents in Whittier, California, and he entered politics in 1946 after serving in the military as a Republican, being elected to Congress, and then getting appointed to the House Un-American Activities Committee, which he used to his political advantage. He was then elected to the U.S. Senate in 1950, but he didn't fool around. He's only a senator. Remember, senators are 6-year terms. So he's only been elected to the Senate in 1950, so he's only a senator 2 years, and he's already been nominated to be vice president. Now, when he wins his Senate race in 1950, he ran against a rather liberal Democrat, Helen Gahanna Douglas. And he passed around a voting guide printed on pink paper that showed that she had voted in Congress with some of the most liberal Democrats or even independents in the House. He was willing to say that she was a full-fledged communist. A Nixon Republican who protected the basic American virtues. Personal liberty, free enterprise, and law and order. Represented the great silent majority. Those are the people who were not the protesters, not the people who were burning down the campuses or terrorizing the Jews at Columbia or whatever, but the people who pay their taxes and keep to themselves. He said he was representing them. Trusted no one, looked for enemies everywhere, especially since he believed he really won the presidency in 1960, but that evil forces had denied him the election. He definitely distrusted the press, hated them, and they hated Nixon too. Nixon will be president from 1969 until 1974. He was supposed to be president through 1977, but he resigns early due to the Watergate crisis. Now, Nixon employs a new way of acting for Republicans and begins a Southern strategy to build the modern Republican Party. The new conservative political alliance was dreamed by this man, William F. Buckley Jr., who is founder of National Review magazine, which is no longer a conservative magazine, but when he started it, it was a conservative one. William F. Buckley and Kevin Phillips. And these are the people that they wanted to bring together to build the new Republican majority. Suburbanites, especially college-age suburban women. So if any of you earn a college degree and then live in the suburbs, maybe you'll be one of these. I don't know. Blue-collar workers, business leaders, Roman Catholics, and philosophical conservatives. Evangelicals would also be thrown into the mix eventually, but not yet. Billy Graham's great advisor and friend was Billy Graham, who was used to position the Republicans as the party of responsible government and defenders of law and order. Billy Graham often invited Nixon to come to his crusades and to speak and give his testimony. Nixon was definitely a political asset to Richard Nixon, and they were personal friends. In fact, Billy Graham will do Nixon's funeral when he finally passes away. Look for civil rights strategy to bring the South into the Republican fold. He did talk about integration, but quit accepting of affirmative action, opposed court-imposed school busing, and giving states increased power to enforce integration and not make it a court order or a federal issue. Nixon also will begin moving the court to a more conservative way. The Supreme Court moves to the right. Earl Warren was replaced by this man, here in the center of this picture, Chief Justice Warren Burger. So Warren Burger will replace Earl Warren. They wanted to keep Warren in the name, but a different Warren. And then he also appoints conservatives Lewis F. Powell and William H. Rehnquist. See if I can find Rehnquist in this picture. This might be Rehnquist here. He will continue to be on the court into the Bush administration because he was elevated to the Chief Justiceship from being an Associate Justice by President Reagan. And then when he passed away, the current Chief Justice was appointed by Bush. He appointed these two as Associate Justices. Now, the war on crime and radicalism, court rulings that protected criminals. Gideon versus Wainwright provided free legal counsel. That is the law, that is the court ruling that said that if you have the right to an attorney and you can't afford one, the government will provide you one for free. The Miranda ruling in Arizona in 1966, police must inform suspects of their rights because unless you know what your rights are, you can't exercise them. FBI infiltrated students for a democratic society and other groups intent on disrupting America and tried to undermine the anti-war movement. they will put together an enemies list that they believed were out to destroy the president. Another thing that they did was launch the plumbers. Now, what did the plumbers do? What do plumbers do?
Unclog toilets.
Well, that is true. And you might be moving into the right direction. Now, this group of plumbers was used to stop leaks of information that were getting to the press. So instead of unclogging something, they try to keep it clogged. These plumbers, they were called plumbers because they were to fix leaks. Plumbers fix leaks, but they were to be talking about it in code. Now, what really happened was there was a man by the name of Daniel Ellsberg who leaked to the New York Times papers that detailed Johnson administration activities about the Vietnam War. And this is what became known as the Pentagon Papers, and Nixon was very upset about that. It exposed the pattern of foreign intrigue and government deception, not only under the Kennedy and mostly under the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. Nixon was not involved, but Nixon was very upset about it on principle. Opening the debate on welfare and the American assistance programs, planned to reform the welfare system, aid to families with dependent children, seen to undermine American work ethic and encourage out-of-wedlock births, so that you may want to be compassionate and give women who had children who weren't married money in order to help provide for them. But one could also say that more children, more money might encourage someone to have children simply because they had extra children out of wedlock. It encouraged that behavior. Then family assistance plan. Nixon's alternative that pleased no one. Give direct cash payments to the family from the federal government and do away with all welfare case workers. The goal would be, if you just sent the person a check in the mail and you don't have welfare caseworkers working everyone, that money that is spent on the caseworker can be used to help give people additional money. Nixon also began what became known as New Federalism. Now, we're getting into my time, in the 1970s. Seeking a balance on the environment. Nixon was a rather liberal person in many ways, but it did infuriate the left at times. Nixon fired Interior Secretary Walter H. Hinkle for prosecuting the Chevron oil for polluting the Gulf of Mexico. Nixon overruled the Department of Transportation on requiring seat belts in new cars. Understand? Department of Transportation in the late 1960s said that new cars had to have seat belts. Nixon said they don't have to have seat belts. Nixon supported, and at first the seat belts were only in the front and only a lap belt. Then nowadays everyone has to be wearing a seat belt or you'll go to jail. Unless you happen to drive one of these cars from the 60s that doesn't have seat belts in it. Nixon supported Alaska oil pipeline, built an airport in the Everglades. People didn't like that. Here is a picture of the building of the pipeline in Alaska. And there were those definitely who did not want that to be built. He did support the environmentalists, though. He created the Occupational Safety and Health Act that set new health standards in workplaces. This is what may be known as OSHA, and requires that there is a minimum degree of safety that every worker should be expected to achieve on the job. The National Air Quality Control Act called for 90% reduction in automobile exhaust by 1975. The National Environmental Policy Act required environmental impact statements for most public projects. And Environmental Protection Agency will ban the pesticide DDT because it was killing birds. It enforced a growing body of environmental laws. Another thing that happened during his time was economic manipulation, stagnation, and the decline of the American economy. The economy was in a growth pattern of 5%, but unemployment doubled from 3.5% to 6% and remained high. And one of the things about the economy during the 1970s is that it just was flat or went down a little every day. And that's probably worse for the economy. 10 years of economic stagnation and slight decline, that's worse than if the economy actually went up and then crashed all in one day. The decade had stunning inflation rates. The idea called stagflation was seen as impossible by Keynesian economic theory. Stagnant growth, rapid inflation, caused by rampant federal spending with a lack of sufficient return for production, skyrocketing costs of materials like oil, and the effect of regulations. Nixon's economic plan was something horrible, horrible, horrible. Wage and price controls. He decided how much you could get paid and how much things cost. This broke the link between the dollar and the price of gold, allowing for inflation to really devalue the US dollar for the first time, and converted to Keynesianism and agreed to stimulate the economy with federal spending. So, one of the things that happened in the 1970s, it was not just the idea that gas was expensive, and it was, like $1 a gallon. Very expensive for then. But there were many times that there were gas shortages in the 70s where there was no gas at any price. And the reason why gas didn't keep going up is because of Nixon's wage and price controls that limited what you could charge for gasoline. He opposed the Equal Rights Amendment, supported the Right to Life movement. I'm not really sure if Nixon was really that conservative on the issue of abortion, because I would say that the Republicans, prior to the Roe versus Wade decision, were probably more liberal on abortion than Democrats. And because so many Democrats were Catholic, and Republicans had a tendency to be more socially liberal. But Nixon saw a way of connecting to the morality on the side of the pro-life side, and so he came out as pro-life, and so did the Republicans after Roe versus Wade was enacted, and vetoed a bill establishing a national system of daycare centers. Now, Nixon and Kissinger. This is one of the great diplomatic teams. There's President Nixon. This is who was originally National Security Advisor, then Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. really did a great job for Nixon. The goals here were that to contain communism, restore America's freedom of action, secure peace with honor in Vietnam, and restore America's role as arbiter of world affairs. Henry Kissinger was born in Germany. He was a Jewish man born in Germany. I think he just recently passed away. He was 100 years old, Henry Kissinger. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard in the news, that he died. I don't think he's doing much else at 100 years old. They got himself into the newspaper. He came to America in 1938. He served in the Army intelligence during World War II, earned a PhD at Harvard, and fascinated with real politics policies of Bismarck. Nixon would be able to create and influence a new world order led by the United States with his help. Kissinger provided both support and philosophical rationale for opening with Russia and China and a possible way to end the Vietnam War. And one of his big moves is right here with the peace with honor in Vietnam. The effort was to win the war, or at least get out of the war in a way that didn't make the United States look like a loser. That's the goal. Because really winning in Vietnam was not going to happen. We just did not want to lose badly. And was a couple great power diplomacy with forces in an effort to negotiate in Paris an acceptable end of the war. Nixon sent a personal message to Ho Chi Minh proposing mutual withdrawal of the South and creating a demilitarized zone. Very similar to what you see going on in Korea. Nixon will eventually bomb Cambodia, right here. Now, Cambodia is a separate country, but the North was sending military down through Laos and Cambodia and invading the South. So it was believed by Nixon that he should bomb Cambodia in order to help relieve pressure on American troops in the South. Nixon leaked that he was planning to bomb the North and use tactical nuclear weapons, bringing the North to the peace table. Now, Congress approved anti-ballistic missile shield, unenthusiastic about nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and wanted the United States to negotiate from a position of strength. Now, the war in Vietnam is becoming a political liability for Nixon. Now, Nixon thought about just declaring the war over when he became president and saying this was a mistake brought to you by the Democrats. But he was afraid that if the United States did not keep its word when it said that they were going to support Vietnam, the South Vietnam, that other nations might see this as a loss of the ability for the United States could not be trusted to keep its word anymore. And a lot of people in both parties were interested in that. And he kept at it and kept at it and kept at it until eventually most people thought it was Richard Nixon's war. I mean, you're handed a presidency and there's a war going on, and before you know it, they think it's your war. So, the first thing that happens was the Vietnam moratorium. And this was a 45,000 participant candlelight vigil at Arlington National Cemetery. Eventually, 500,000 plus filled the mall in Washington DC for over 5 hours to protest the war. This protest was not violent. They were vocal, they were there. But Nixon said, I cannot allow a couple 100,000 people in Washington on the streets to decide national policy, because he believed the people were with him, that he needed to stay the course in Vietnam. So Nixon came up with a new plan. It was called Vietnamization of the war. Doesn't that sound like a great plan? What he was going to do was, he was going to slowly transfer the fighting responsibility to Vietnamese people. But the war dragged on and on and on and on and on. He was frightened that by the student protesters, but would not go along with the isolationists in Congress to withdraw 25,000 American troops. He began to turn the fighting over to South Vietnamese troops. Nixon called on the great silent majority, those are the people who aren't protesting, to support his plan to achieve peace with honor. His great silent majority speech was his best moment politically. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of telegrams and letters and calls flooded the White House, proving that the majority of the American people, or at least a lot of American people, supported him. Nixon would send his vice president out to do his dirty work. That's often the job of the vice president. In this case, it was Spiro T. Agnew, who was seen as a conservative agitator in the 19th century. It's hard to imagine that Spiro T. Agnew was seen as such a valuable person at that time. He appealed to traditional mainstream Americans who were concerned about the decline of American prestige.
Nixon loved the movie Patton and watched it again and again in the White House. General George Patton was a man of action, contemptuous of his critics, uncompromising, determined to win at all costs.
I want you to remember, Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war. Because the very thought of losing is hateful to Americans.
Richard Nixon was determined not to be the first American president to lose a war. He might simply have brought the troops home and blamed Vietnam on the Democrats. But Nixon, like many of his contemporaries in both parties, believed that abandoning South to the communists would be a defeat that invited further aggression, a sign that America could no longer be counted on by her allies. Despite mounting pressure for immediate withdrawal, he stuck to his gradual course while trying to negotiate what he called an honorable end to the war. But the months dragged on, casualties mounted, and Nixon's policy seemed only to prolong America's agony.
I said, with respect to Vietnam, I said the war in Vietnam is lost. And the sooner you get out, the better we will be. it was lost, but he for some reason kept high.
I love his voice.
It seemed to me that
He was a senator, a Democratic senator from New York after this.
he stuck around the war for 2 years, and it's your war, and the Kennedy's war. When in the end, half the country seemed to think he started it.
In October 1969, the largest anti-war demonstrations in the nation's history, collectively known as the Moratorium, were held in cities all over the country. Critics of the war had waited 9 months for Nixon to make good his pledge to end the conflict. But now the honeymoon was over.
I understand that there has been and continues to be opposition to the war in Vietnam on the campuses and also in the nation. As far as this kind of activity is concerned, we expect it. However, under no circumstances will I be affected whatever by it.
The moratorium itself was seen by Richard Nixon as 200,000 people out there on the mall protesting his foreign policy, while at the same time the polls were showing that 58–59% of the American people supported him in his foreign policy. And he would look out the window and he would say, I simply cannot permit foreign policy to be made in the streets of Washington.
The President of the United States said nothing you young kids would do would have any effect on him. Well, I suggest to the President of the United States, if he wants to know how much effect you youngsters can have on the President, he should make one long-distance phone call to the LBJ Ranch and ask that boy how much effect you can have.
The fate of Lyndon Johnson did haunt Richard Nixon. He felt he had to demonstrate that most Americans still supported him, and that it would not benefit Hanoi to stall peace negotiations. Don't get rattled. Don't waver. Don't react, he told himself, as he went to work on a speech to respond to the protests. Insisting on writing it himself, he distinguished his supporters, the forgotten Americans, from the vocal minority in the streets with a new catchphrase.
To you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris. Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
It was the most effective speech of Nixon's presidency. 80,000 telegrams and letters arrived at the White House. Nearly all supported him. His approval rating soared. But the war continued, and with it the protests.
I think Richard Nixon came to office expecting, if not a quick fix in Vietnam, expecting a kind of responsiveness in the war. He had made certain speeches, he had offered certain gestures, he had proffered both secretly and publicly what he thought were promising initiatives in negotiations. None of that had yielded anything. There was a palpable sense of frustration in the administration about how long this war was going to drag on. Out of the Oval Office began to flood memoranda that were extremely conscious renditions of the president's fears and ambitions in Southeast Asia. His image of this whole contest as a kind of challenge being issued not only by the parties on the ground, by the Cambodian rebels, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, but ultimately by more formidable and distant forces, the Soviet Union, by China, by his enemies, testing him, measuring his mettle as a man and as a leader. He took me aside and he said, I'm going to be out of the play for 10 days here. I won't be able to handle any domestic decisions for 10 days. So come back this afternoon and tell me all the things that need to be decided for the next 10 days. And then I won't be able to see you because I'm going to be focusing
on this business of Vietnam and try and bring it to a head. At the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Laird waited for the president. After days of tense deliberation, Nixon was about to announce an attack on enemy sanctuaries across the Vietnam border in Cambodia, and he would do so over the objections of many White House advisors.
We thought the invasion was a bad idea, and that it was one more round of escalation on the pattern, on an old pattern in Vietnam, which would cost lives and national treasure, and really only prolong the suffering and do nothing to affect the larger outcome of the war.
But the military and Kissinger recommended the action, and Nixon wanted to go ahead. He was convinced that destroying the North Vietnamese hiding places in Cambodia would relieve communist pressure on the South. And he wanted to take some dramatic action to demonstrate that neither Hanoi nor the anti-war movement could intimidate the United States or its president.
If, when the chips are down, the world's most powerful nation, the United States of America, acts like a pitiful, helpless giant, the forces of totalitarianism and anarchy will threaten free nations and free institutions throughout the world. It is not our power, but our will and character that is being tested tonight.
As Nixon spoke, American troops moved into Cambodia. His critics were outraged. The president who had promised to end the war seemed to be widening it, moving into a country perceived as neutral. 3 members of Kissinger's staff, including Roger Morris, resigned in protest. Nixon was unmoved.
I would rather be a one-term president and do what I believe was right than to be a 2-term president at the cost of seeing America become a second-rate power and to see this nation accept the first defeat in its proud 190-year history.
Early the next morning, Nixon went to the Pentagon for a first-hand briefing. The military was reporting success. Nixon was encouraged and praised American soldiers fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The wife of one of those soldiers reached out to shake his hand. Nixon drew a sharp contrast between the troops in Vietnam and the student protesters at home.
Now, when he does that, in 1960 or early 1970s, as we mentioned, he did allow troops into Cambodia. The American troops invaded Cambodia to suppress North Vietnamese bases in that country, even though it was wrong for us to go in. The North Vietnamese were in Cambodia and Laos, and they were using that neutral country as a staging ground for attacks on our troops. The campaign was successful in removing the pressure on the South and promoted the Vietnamization plan. Now, this is where this is what will happen next. And we will deal with this next week. The campuses explode. There's violence all over the place. And the most dramatic events take place here, Kent State in Ohio. I think this is up near Cleveland, but Kent State in Ohio is where there was a shooting when the ROTC building at Kent State was attacked by the protesters. The National Guard will open fire on the students, and 4, I believe, are killed. 4 students are killed. Unfortunately, one of them was just someone trying to get to class who was not involved with the protesters at all. Anyway, though, this really is something significant. So when we come back, we'll pick things up there in the 1970s.
Thank you.
Aha. Thank you. Hi,
Hi, yes.
I'm free before chapel, anytime in the morning on Wednesday and Friday, and Tuesday and Thursday afternoon.
Tuesday and
Thursday afternoon.
afternoons. Okay.
So you can figure out when that fits into your schedule and let me know.
Okay, I would probably, yeah, I'll probably be more free in the afternoon.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to like see
Yeah.
where I was on track. So I'm looking to go to nursing school in January, so. Yep.